Why are some Iranians welcoming foreign intervention and viewing regime change as liberation, whilst others condemn it as an unacceptable violation of international law? All around the world, members of the Iranian diaspora have celebrated US and Israeli airstrikes as a step towards freedom, whilst other Iranians view the killing of Ali Khamenei by these airstrikes as unacceptable morally and politically. So why are there such starkly different reactions to the current situation in Iran? Well, let's take a look at some of the arguments used to justify either side. Many of the Iranians that have welcomed the attacks view them as the only solution to end the Islamic regime that came to power in 1979 and that has since enacted many repressive laws that have significantly limited personal freedoms, especially for women. They believe that existing within the regime has become increasingly difficult and that people are only surviving, and therefore it's something that must be toppled. They believe that the airstrikes are the only way to do this, since it's become impossible for Iranians within to overthrow the regime, not just because the regime has a sizable amount of supporters, but because the government has violently cracked down on protesters and continuously silences dissent. In fact, in December 2025, nationwide protests erupted across Iran, largely in response to the economic crisis, the soaring inflation rates, and the high food prices. This uprising was the largest in Iran's history since the 1979 revolution. But the government's response was a brutal shutdown of the protests that resulted in a death toll of anywhere between 7,000 to 35,000 lives. Many of these Iranians would hope to see a return to a monarchy, the one that was overthrown by the Islamic government, potentially headed by this man, Reza Pahlavi, who was the Shah, or the king's son. But there are some Iranians that are fervently against these attacks and this possible regime change. But why? Well, first of all, many of them view any form of foreign intervention that is aimed at toppling the government as illegal and a form of imperialism, especially when, in their view, it's coming from the US and Israel, two nations that don't have the greatest track record in the Middle East. To them, it is a clear attack on Iran's sovereignty and a dangerous breach of international law. Many look to the US's history of foreign intervention in the Middle East, and they argue that there isn't a single successful case of regime change that hasn't harmed the civilian population and left them worse off, and they usually cite Iraq and Afghanistan as being the two prime examples of this. They claim that the current attacks on Iran will only destabilize the country and increase conflict in the Middle East for the sole purpose of advancing American and Israeli strategic interests. So this debate brings to light the question of, can foreign intervention ever be morally justified, especially when innocent civilians are dying in the process, or must political change always come from within?